He dragged you back down the hallway with ruthless strength, your bare feet scraping against the floor as you resisted every step. You kicked and twisted, but his grip didn't falter. His calm fury was terrifying, a smoldering anger that promised pain rather than empty threats. Finally, he shoved you into the same room you'd started in, the door slamming shut behind him. You stumbled forward and caught yourself on the chair, your breathing ragged as you turned to face him. He stood by the door, his chest rising and falling, his expression an unsettling mix of amusement and rage. "You just don't learn, do you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. He stepped closer, his boots echoing ominously in the confined space. "But that's okay. I'm very good at teaching lessons." He moved toward you, and instinctively, you backed away, your legs trembling from the effort. But there was nowhere to go. He towered over you, his presence suffocating, and for the first time, true panic started to creep in. "Please," you said, your voice cracking despite your best efforts to sound strong. "You don't have to do this." He paused at your words, his head tilting as if considering them. A flicker of something crossed his face. Pity, perhaps, or even curiosity. But it vanished just as quickly as it had appeared. "You don't get it yet, do you?" he said, his tone soft but edged with menace. "This isn't about what I have to do. It's about what you need to understand." Before you could respond, he grabbed the ropes from the floor and began tying your wrists again, this time tighter than before. You struggled, but his grip was unrelenting, and within moments, you were back in the chair, bound and helpless. "You're going to stay here until you learn how to behave," he said, crouching in front of you and cupping your face in his hand. His touch was deceptively gentle, but the threat in his eyes was impossible to miss. "And if you try to run again, sweetheart, I'll make sure you regret it." He stood and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "You need to think about why you're here," he said, looking back at you. "And you need to understand one thing. There's no escape, not for you." The door slammed shut, and the sound of the lock clicking into place was like a hammer to your chest. You sat in the chair, your wrists burning from the tight ropes, your mind reeling. He was wrong. There had to be a way out. You just hadn't found it yet. Your eyes darted around the room once more, desperation sharpening your focus. The broken glass from earlier still lay on the floor, glinting faintly in the dim light. He hadn't noticed it, or hadn't cared. Either way, it was your only chance. You shifted in the chair, testing the ropes again. They were tighter than before, but not invincible. Slowly, carefully, you began working your wrists against the fibers, using the sharp edge of determination to keep yourself going. You began moving your wrists subtly, testing the give of the rope. It was tight, but you'd already loosened it slightly during your earlier attempt. Now, you focused all your energy on freeing yourself, biting down on your frustration to avoid making any noise that could alert him. The sound of your breath, shallow and controlled, filled the otherwise silent room. The shards of glass on the floor glinted faintly under the dim light. You needed to reach them, but first, you had to get your hands free. The rope bit into your skin, rough and unforgiving, but you forced yourself to keep working at it, twisting and pulling as pain radiated up your arms. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours, and sweat dripped down your temple. Finally, you felt the knot give just a little more. The pressure around your wrists slackened slightly, just enough for you to slip one hand free. You paused, listening. No sound, no footsteps. He wasn't coming back yet. Slowly, you worked on the other wrist, and within moments, you were free. Your arms were trembling, your wrists raw and red, but you ignored the pain. You slid down to the floor and crawled toward the shards of glass, keeping your movements slow and deliberate to avoid making noise. Your fingers closed around a jagged piece of glass. It was small, barely larger than the palm of your hand, but it was sharp. You turned it over in your hand, testing its edge. It wasn't much, but it was something, and right now, anything was better than nothing. You rose to your feet carefully, clutching the shard in your hand as you moved toward the door. The lock clicked faintly when you tested it, still secured. You cursed under your breath, your mind racing. If you could catch him off guard, maybe, just maybe, you'd have a chance. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made you freeze. He was coming back. You quickly stepped to the side of the door, pressing yourself against the wall. Your heart pounded in your chest as you gripped the shard tightly, your knuckles turning white. You knew this was risky. If he overpowered you, there might not be a second chance. But if you didn't fight now, you might never get another opportunity. The footsteps grew louder, and then the lock turned. The door creaked open, and his silhouette filled the doorway. He stepped inside, his gaze immediately landing on the empty chair. "Well, well," he said, his voice low and amused. "You've been busy." He took another step into the room, and that's when you struck. You lunged at him from the side, the shard of glass slashing toward his arm. He reacted quickly, his reflexes sharp, but the blade caught him, cutting through his sleeve and grazing his skin. He cursed, stumbling back, and you used the moment to dart toward the open door. But he recovered faster than you expected, grabbing your arm and yanking you back. The glass fell from your hand, clattering to the floor as you struggled against him. "Enough," he snarled, his grip like iron as he spun you around and pinned you against the wall. His eyes were wild, his chest heaving as blood seeped through the cut on his arm. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, his voice dripping with anger. "You think you can outsmart me?" You glared at him, refusing to back down even as fear coiled tightly in your chest. "I'll never stop trying," you spat, your voice defiant. "You can't keep me here forever." For a moment, he stared at you, his expression unreadable. Then he chuckled, a low, dark sound that sent chills down your spine. "We'll see about that," he said, his grip tightening. "You've got fire, sweetheart. I like that. But don't mistake it for power." He dragged you back toward the chair, forcing you to sit as he reached for the ropes. This time he tied your wrists and ankles with brutal efficiency, his movements rougher than before. "I warned you," he said, his voice cold. "And now, you're going to learn what happens when you disobey." He stood back, breathing heavily as he stared at you, his dark eyes searching your face for something. Fear, compliance, submission. You refused to give him any of it. Despite the ropes cutting into your wrists and the throbbing pain in your limbs, you lifted your chin defiantly, locking eyes with him. His smirk returned, but it was colder this time, laced with frustration and something more dangerous. "You really are something," he said, shaking his head. "Most people would have broken by now, but not you." He crouched down in front of you, resting his forearms on his knees, his face inches from yours. "That's fine," he said softly, his voice almost gentle. "I don't mind breaking you the hard way." Your stomach churned at his words, but you didn't let your expression falter. You had to stay strong, had to keep thinking. He wanted you to feel powerless, but you couldn't let him win, not mentally, not emotionally. He leaned in closer, his breath warm against your skin. "You're going to learn, sweetheart," he murmured, his tone deceptively soothing. "Learn that you belong to me now. And no matter how hard you fight, no matter what you try." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from your face, his touch lingering. "You'll always end up right back here." He stood abruptly, his towering figure casting a shadow over you. "I'll leave you to think about that," he said, turning toward the door. "And next time, don't bother trying anything stupid. It won't end well for you." The door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place once more. Silence enveloped the room, save for the sound of your breathing. You sat there, staring at the door, the weight of his words sinking in. But he was wrong. You weren't going to stay here. You weren't going to belong to anyone, and you weren't going to stop fighting. The glass shard was gone, but you still had one advantage. He underestimated you. He thought he'd broken your spirit, thought you'd fall in line. But he didn't know you, not really. He didn't know how far you were willing to go to escape this nightmare. You shifted in the chair, testing the ropes again. This time they were tighter, much tighter. Your wrists throbbed as you strained against them, but you couldn't give up. You wouldn't. Your eyes scanned the room again, desperate for something, anything you could use. The broken glass was scattered across the floor, too far out of reach. The chair creaked faintly as you moved, and an idea began to form in your mind. It was risky, but it was all you had. You rocked the chair slightly, testing its balance. It was heavy, solid, but with enough force, you might be able to tip it over. If you could hit the floor hard enough, you might loosen the ropes, or even break the chair itself. Taking a deep breath, you braced yourself. Then, with all the strength you could muster, you threw your weight to the side. The chair teetered, wobbling dangerously before crashing to the floor with a deafening bang. Pain shot through your shoulder as you hit the ground, but you didn't stop. You twisted and turned, slamming the chair against the floor again and again, hoping the impact would weaken the ropes or the joints of the chair. Sweat dripped down your face as you struggled, your muscles burning with the effort. You didn't know how much time you had before he returned, but you couldn't think about that. All that mattered was getting free. Finally you felt it, the faintest give in the ropes. You twisted your wrists again, pulling and tugging until the fibers began to fray. With one last desperate yank, your hands came free. You didn't stop to celebrate. You worked quickly, untying your ankles and scrambling to your feet. Your body ached, but you pushed through the pain, adrenaline coursing through your veins. You glanced toward the door, your mind racing. You needed a plan, a way to escape without being caught. And this time, you weren't going to leave anything to chance.